Hey guys, welcome to our first video from our channel, Analytics Unfiltered. In this video, we'll talk about different source systems and how the data migrates from those source systems into their target. So what are source systems? Source systems can be anything in form of a flat file. What do I mean by flat file? Flat file can be your PDF, your Excel files, your spreadsheets, your Word document, your emails, anything that's in a form of file, considered a flat file. It can also be source systems in form of databases. So for example, your Oracle database, Teradata, Netezza, SQL Server, Microsoft Access as well, although that's old, nobody uses that. So those are your databases, and then you can also have source systems where you're integrating data from another third party or external vendors via API. So you're making an API call, they send a response, you capture that data, store it into your system. So just to name a few, so these are your source systems. So what typically happens is that you take all of these source systems, you capture all of that data, and you migrate it over to one of your cloud providers. Who are the cloud providers? Well, you have AWS, you have GCP, and you have Azure. AWS is one of the leading providers, and then Azure and GCP kind of follow their path afterwards. But the services that are offered by these cloud providers are very similar across each provider. So if they're providing Oracle Cloud, you'll also have them likely in GCP or Azure, and so on and so forth. They'll also provide not just the database services, they also provide programming capability, being able to deploy your apps, several different types of services that you'll see in a cloud. So in our later videos, we'll actually go into AWS, we'll show you and talk about what are some of those services. And so we'll talk through them in detail. And we'll also go into GCP or possibly Azure as well. Let's talk about how the data flows from end to end. So let me go ahead and begin my screen share so that I can show you guys some of the screens, and we'll try to draw this out on the live. So what happens, like I said, you have multiple source systems. So you have source A, you have source B, you have source C. So let's write this as an A, let's write this as B and C. And then from here, you're trying to ingest all of these sources into what we call a landing zone. So landing zone, again, any of the cloud providers, you're moving data from either on-prem to a cloud. You want to land that data somewhere in cloud. So we'll use AWS as an example, but like I said, similar services. So AWS has something called S3, Simple Storage Service. That's what S3 stands for. And basically all it is similar to your Windows files and folders or your Mac files and folder structure. But it effectively lands the data there. You can land any form of data, whether it's media, JPEG, photos, videos, files, anything. And the cost of storing that data is actually very cheap compared to storing it on-prem and then maintaining it. So that's one of the things that cloud providers attempt to do, right? Cut down the cost of what you're paying on your on-prem databases. So here's what happens. We'll have this, we'll make an arrow here, and all of this, pardon my not so great handwriting, but all of this will land into an S3, where all of this data is going to be. And we land this in its raw form. So you will have this in the most raw form available to you. Again, same thing, you are storing it, the storage is very cheap, so it doesn't matter, the size of the files, how many files there are, what's the frequency and all of that. The cost of that is very cheap. And they also provide something called Glacier, which means that files are very infrequently accessed, or you only need them one time and then you can park them elsewhere, just because you need to keep them for regulations or whatnot. So the cost goes even cheaper if you're using those type of services. But initially, when you're landing the data, you obviously want to process that. So once we have it into S3, you typically move that into another S3 bucket where you transform only the data that you need to transform. So from here, we'll move to another S3. And bucket, again, is similar to a folder structure. So think of the, your top level folder can be a bucket. I guess that's a good analogy to compare with. And then once you have in this transform or clean layer of this data, you've only identified the data that you need. You're not bringing in all of the data, right? You may be bringing in a lot more volume of data in your raw layer, but in your transform/clean layer, you're only going to bring in the data that you need. So we'll call this clean. And then once you have this data in the clean layer, you're going to take this data and we'll build something what we call an enterprise data warehouse. So enterprise data warehouse, you have a centralized data repository, right? And you're removing data redundancies and you want a single source of truth. So no matter who in the organization tries to access the data or create a report, you will have one right answer. And the reason for that is because, well, you have everything is standardized. You have everything in one location. All of your data is centralized. So all your numbers are going to be the same. And that's where some of the data modeling comes in. We will talk a little bit deeper into that on our next or our future podcast. So when we talk about the databases, right, EDW, Enterprise Data Warehouse, you need a database to store it. So from AWS, you have Redshift as a data warehouse. They provide a data warehouse as a service, which means that you don't have to do any patching, right? If you have it on-prem, you probably have a cost to, one, install it on the server, two, back up the data regularly, three, you also need to patch it to keep it, up to date with its guarantee time, with its, I guess you keep it most upgraded so that, it's covered within your warranty that you purchase it for and for support. So you have that, but with Redshift as a data warehouse, when a cloud provider provides it, you don't have to worry about all of that. They will do their patching, they will take care of the database. All you have to do is ingest the data and then, watch it do its magic in analytics. You still have to do the work of doing the data modeling, right? Not everything is going away, but a lot of the data administration tasks that were there will fade away. So from here, we'll have our EDW. So we'll have our database. That's going to be EDW. And in this database, my drawing is horrible. But you can see in this database, this is going to be Redshift, or it can be Synapse from Microsoft Azure, or you can use one of the Google databases as well. But these are the data warehouses primarily for analytics. So you have this database, and then from here you have what we called your Viz. Or what do I mean by Viz? Viz is basically your analytics, right? So you're using Tableau, Power BI. These are the two leading, or two most commonly used, I should say, visualization services. So allows you to create your bars and graphs and all of that. So this is the typical flow of the data from end to end. We'll go obviously in our future videos more in depth, right? We'll talk about the specifics of these source systems, A, B, or C, different types. We'll actually show you how the data looks in its raw form. We'll show you how we clean it and then how we do an EDW. And we'll actually go through using examples, real world example, to actually go ahead and model that with you. So recap, sources can be any type, flat files, databases, images, PDFs, APIs from your different types of vendors. What happens to that? You want to land the data in its most original form. We call it the raw layer, and you land it in an S3 bucket, which is similar to your folder types structure on your Windows or your Mac. You're going to store the data there, right? The cost is low, so it doesn't matter how much you're storing it, what type of data it is, the form and all of that. Then we move it to our clean layer, which is basically only the data that we need to create analytics on. So we do some of the transformation, cleansing of that data over there. And then from there, we do the data modeling. We move the data into an enterprise data warehouse. And then in the EDW, you create your facts and your dimensions. And then post that, you have your visualization layer, which is basically a lot of the analytics. So that's what I wanted to cover in this video. Hopefully it's been helpful. In our future videos, we're obviously going to talk more about each of these in more detail. But hopefully you enjoyed it. Stay tuned, like, subscribe, and share so you can get this content. Until next time, take care, guys.